Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Holotape podcast, where we just talk about Fallout, and Fallout. We're not here to discuss rumors about Fallout 4 or nitpick about the games, what's good or bad, or bash on Bethesda or on Interplay or compare the two. We're just here to revel in the joy that is the Fallout universe. And yes, and my name is Jordan. I'll be your host today, and this is my nefarious cohort, Lucas, and our two guests, Will and Simon, who are both avid Fallout fans and lovers of the lore, as are myself and Lucas. So let's go ahead and get started. Remember to direct any of your questions to our Twitter at Holotapes Weekly, and we can pick it up on our next podcast and maybe answer some of your questions or maybe a few challenges if you'd like. And our SoundCloud is also Holotapes Weekly, where you can check it out. We probably will have a YouTube eventually. Who knows? I don't know. But we're getting there. So today we're just going to be talking about, for just a moment, what was it that really brings you into the Fallout universe? What was it that brought you there in the first place?
Well, I guess one of the things that really got me into Fallout was just you have a video game that it brings about a whole new perspective in terms of adventure. You have a game where you are in the middle of this war-torn landscape. It's a desolate human society, and now you have to survive in it, and you have to find ways to somehow exist with this new civilization. That kind of aspect really drew me into the Fallout universe, and I loved it ever since.
Go
ahead.
When I first started, I had just come from Oblivion, and I
the
remember
Elder Scrolls games.
Yeah, the Elder Scrolls games. I remember coming out of the vault and just seeing this completely destroyed environment, very, very different from the very fantastic environment that is Cyrodiil. And it was just so kind of intense survival feeling I got when just trying to get from one place to another.
You know, absolutely. And I think all of us have really similar experiences of playing Fallout and playing the Elder Scrolls series. And they're two very, very different universes, you know. And, we can get this huge sense of the lore behind both of them, but there's just something about Fallout that I think that we can all agree really draws you into the story more so than any game that I can think of. It may not be the greatest game in terms of technical specs or graphics or anything like that, but its storytelling is top-notch. It is absolutely worth 5 stars, 10 out of 10 would, I would read the scripts of these games, not even hearing the voice acting or anything.
Just commenting on what you said, Jordan. When I play Fallout 3, I usually started a new playthrough, and it's just absolutely amazing, immersive feeling, much more than any other game I play. I feel so much more immersed into the character and the surroundings and the environment. It feels kind of plausible, I guess.
They do a very good job of bringing out that very realistic, very American wastelandish feel, while keeping with this sort of tone of like a dark humor story. It is something that we can all see the world coming to, and it really feeds off this this natural human thought of, oh my gosh, the world is going to end one day. What happens afterwards?
Yeah, for sure. And also to chime in on that, I think you can quite clearly see some of the influences of like post-apocalyptic films that it also drew a good influence from, like A Boy and His Dog. I get a real Fallout feel with that film, as well as like the obvious ones like Mad Max, but even more contemporary films like The Book of Eli, The Road, The Day.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the really interesting things about Fallout is, especially in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, we see these different areas that are very, very unique. We see, Canterbury Commons in Fallout 3 being this merchant hub. We see Rivet City, which was originally a scientific outpost, eventually becoming sort of just this ramble shack of a town. And we see in New Vegas, we see huge sprawling cities like Freeside and the Strip. And something that really always intrigued me is this idea of thriving versus surviving. And it's just a very, very unique feeling that you get in each of the towns on which way are they leaning.
Yeah, I do feel that Fallout 3 is mostly surviving, because in Fallout New Vegas there's the NCR, which has expanded a lot. It's just pretty huge.
Influence.
Influence, and they have a lot of territory. They're kind of self-sufficient with farms, and a lot of Brahmin cattle, so they have both vegetables and meat. Where even Rivet City, they don't really have any place where they can plant corn or maize or anything of that kind. I'm pretty sure they either scavenge or trade for all of their food.
We do see them growing some vegetables. They do a lot of experimenting with vegetables in the science lab of Rivet City, and they do speak about that being enough to cover some of their needs. But they do say that they trade with Canterbury Commons, who trades even further out west and south, where they have a little bit better farmland. But it's definitely this very, very interesting idea of, the NCR being just a huge factor when it comes to this thriving versus surviving. And it's really interesting to think about the fact that in Fallout 1, you were basically the founder of the NCR, being the Vault Dweller. It's just really interesting to see, the influence of the player, if you have played that far back in the games, to now to see how much influence it really has and how much it's really come to building civilization back from the ground up.
Probably one of my favorite aspects about the whole storyline going from coast to coast, because Fallout 1 seems to follow most of the West Coast, and Fallout 3 is East Coast. It's just the connections of the storylines in terms of the East Coast is mostly still destroyed from 3 onwards. But on the West Coast, you have the NCR, you have Kaiser's Legion. Both of them are actually thriving, even though they're still warring at each other. And that's actually still one of my favorite contrasting plot points, was that you still have a destroyed East Coast. You have a starting to thrive West Coast. And that was a plot point that I thought was logical, because the East Coast has so many important cities that you would think that place would be just utterly obliterated. All these civilizations have to rise from the ashes of that. But out west, there's really not as much. And you can see out in the wastelands of the Mojave, a lot of that area, even though it was damaged with nuclear bombs, it was relatively not as damaged and destroyed.
Yeah, absolutely.
It has more greener parts as well, more vegetation. Even like the population, the civilization just seems to be a lot more colorful and thriving, like we keep saying. Whereas the DC wastes are just totally barren, gritty, dull colors, and it's a much more harsher environment.
Being from the U.S. and having traveled the U.S. quite a bit, I can comment on the fact that even now in the U.S., the further west you go, the more you notice, forests and things like that. On the East Coast, while there are forests, there are much larger patches of just straight city and road, and very, very little vegetation. And one other thing that I wanted to comment on that Will said was he called it Kaiser's Legion, and I'm gonna say that you're a traitor to the NCR for saying that, because it's it's Caesar's Legion. And if you say Kaiser's Legion, I'm going to assume you're a Legion dog and put you down as necessary.
Yeah.
Let's go easy on the politics. I just wanted to ask everyone something. Is obviously we've established kind of the main, differences between the two settings on the East to West, but which is a better experience for you, New Vegas or Fallout 3? Given the specifics we've just mentioned.
That really depends on whether or not how you want your wasteland experience to be. I loved the natural experience that the Mojave gave you. That was something that was a refresher. You didn't have as many destroyed skyscrapers in the distance, but you still had the emptiness and the lack of civilization that the apocalypse would still bring. So it all depends on how you really want your apocalypse to taste, what flavor you want.
See, I really, really liked the Fallout 3 setting with just the completely destroyed city, where if you want to move around from place to place in the city, you have to go down through the metros and into service tunnels and up again in other places. It just gave this more gritty and dangerous-ish feeling of traveling, whereas in New Vegas, I kind of felt it was too civilized for a post-apocalyptic.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Simon, but I basically totally agree with you. I think Fallout 3 just felt more gritty and barren, and definitely it had more of this lonesome apocalyptic feel, which kind of felt more like an immersive film to me, whereas New Vegas felt a bit more kind of, I don't want to say wacky, but like it had a bit more random stuff going on.
It seems like you're cutting out just a little bit there, Lucas. But I definitely see where you're coming from with saying that it's very much of a grittier feel. But to be honest, can we even compare the two? Can we say that these are comparable substances? Because one of them we're seeing a place that is on the edge of civilization, it's the frontier, and the other one is just completely barren wasteland. This is the moon in comparison, and I think that they both offer something in the way of what are you looking for at that particular moment? Because there are times when I've absolutely wanted to play Fallout 3 more than New Vegas, or New Vegas more than Fallout 3, because I wanted that aesthetic appeal. I wanted that feeling.
Well, I actually think that Fallout New Vegas is more of kind of a post-apocalyptic setting, where things are kind of getting back to normal, whereas Fallout 3 is the post-apocalyptic setting. So I'd say they aren't really as comparable as some people say they are.
I feel like Fallout 3 feels more like it feels like it's closer to the point of everything sort of going pear-shaped, whereas New Vegas feels like things have progressed a bit more.
Yeah, exactly.
And that kind of fits with the rumor that has always been around Fallout 3, that it was supposed to be a prequel to Fallout 1. It was supposed to be directly after the Great War, and it would have been very interesting to see a game like that. But I think that overall, Fallout 3 being set after Fallout 2 was a much better prospect, because it had more time to develop, as we got to see more of these super mutants coming about, which I don't think we would have really seen if it had been just after the Great War. We wouldn't have seen death claws, and we wouldn't have seen many of these buildings being as destroyed as they are now in Fallout 3.
Yeah, that's actually I was on this on the Fallout subreddit, and people were talking about how they thought it was unrealistic that the Fallout 3 setting was still as bad as it is 200 years after the Great War. But I don't really think they think about that. This is DC, the seat of the government, so of course this place will be hit much harder than any other place. I think there's actually some mention of the White House being hit directly by a bomb, and then there's also the Vault 87, I think it's called, where the super mutants pour out of and hold back lots of people to mutate, and not really giving people a chance to get a proper settlement going. Definitely not inside the city where they're just crawling all over the place.
I would absolutely agree with you.
And also, if you look at the Point Lookout DLC, which is obviously set in a more swampy marshland, I mean, that's just like taking it slightly rural, but you can already see that that place isn't as affected as the DC ruins are. So it does kind of, backs up what you were saying, Simon.
Lookout, though. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was saying, Point Lookout, though, is an interesting phenomenon. I do a little freshwater fisheries work, so I looked at a lot of the natural history of that area. And it makes sense that that area is so screwed up in terms of like post-apocalyptic, because if I remember through most of the Fallout 3 game, all the waters were contaminated really heavily with radiation at some point, whether it be, a light little deal, or it's a over time kind of thing. What I'm trying to say is that Point Lookout was very severely affected by the radiation over time, and it really resulted in all these weird establishments with people mutated. You have these farm hillbilly guys that are just so disshapen that I think Point Lookout was just severely affected with the DC drop, even though it wasn't bombed. But you can see where all the fallout seemed to have flowed afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing about Point Lookout is, even though these swamp folk are very mutated and inbred and things like that, it is still a culture that has developed. They have housing, they have buildings, they are developed, and that is very different from the DC Wasteland. Going back to what Simon said, the White House was hit directly. But beyond that, we do see that there are some things happening in the DC Wasteland that have been developed. For example, the Pentagon is completely changed. I mean, the Brotherhood of Steel has completely taken that over as their safe house, and we see that they have giant metal doors that they control with cranes, and the inside is cleaned up quite a bit. We also see that the Super Mutants Talon Company and the Super Mutants have all dug out trenches in the middle of the Washington D.C. Mall area, and that must have taken. Pardon me, quite a while, years, I would guess.
Well, definitely. I mean, what's the time frame again? Sort of 200 years, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
And that's given, that the Brotherhood of Steel kind of got to work straight after the Great War and the fallout happened. So it seems like enough time for them to really start establishing and building some kind of stronghold in the DC wastes.
Right. Well. The Brotherhood of Steel started out in the East Coast, and then part of them moved to the West Coast to find technology to bring back to the East Coast, and then
you have that reversed.
Do I?
Yes, they started West Coast, moved East Coast. In the Lions. Elder Lyons was the one who brought everyone to the East Coast in DC.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yeah.
No. I mean, I get it. It does get confusing.
Yeah. Well, they started on the East Coast and moved. Nope. Started on the West Coast, moved to the East Coast. Right.
Yes.
Good. Where Elder Lyons then decides to abandon the technology gathering to help the people there, because he sees how badly they have it.
Absolutely. To be honest, I think that the Brotherhood of Steel on the East Coast may be the best bet for rebuilding civilization under the command of Elder Lyons, just because he has a very good idea of what the Brotherhood of Steel should be. He's not like the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 and Fallout New Vegas. All of the Brotherhood of Steel that's on the West Coast, they're very protective. They don't want anyone to come in. They don't want to help anyone. They're all about making sure technology stays out of people's hands. And so he's got a very different ideal about what the Brotherhood should be.
Yeah, and even the Brotherhood still on the East Coast, they're still kind of protective of themselves. They still don't really like outsiders, but they still do what they can to battle the raiders and the super mutants, and clearing out as much as possible, gathering. They still gather some technology and everything that could be useful, but for the benefit of the capital wasteland, and not just to gather the technology and safekeep it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, if we're going to talk about who's the best for the wasteland, we obviously have to talk about the followers of the apocalypse, right?
Well, there's them, but there's also other organizations too. For example, you have the Commonwealth up in the Northeast, but you also have arguably the Legions or the NCR.
We could argue about the Legion having a lot of power. The Commonwealth, we absolutely do not have enough information on to really comment on it yet. All that we know is that they have something to do with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, otherwise known as MIT, and something about androids. That's really all that we know. As for the NCR and the Legion, I think that the Legion just doesn't have enough hope to hold the wasteland together, because we all know that as soon as Caesar falls, it's really the whole system collapses. He really has, through sheer force of will, held together his entire regiment.
Sorry, microphone problems on my end.
Yeah, the Legion doesn't. To me, they don't seem like they have any sort of good intentions. It seems more like a power trip than, say, the Brotherhood of Steel, who actually have like some kind of moral compass for the rest of the wasteland.
Some of the Brotherhood of Steel, because we could argue about Elder McNamara and Elder Elijah from the Dead Money add-on and Old World Blues and things like that. We could argue that they don't have any moral code for the wasteland whatsoever. They're only looking out for the Brotherhood of Steel. We could talk about Veronica being a possible elder in the future. She would have a very good grasp over what the wasteland needs, being that she wanted to join up with the followers of the apocalypse. She was interested in seeing what it was like outside of the bunker. But the Legion, absolutely, I'm going to have to absolutely say that they do not have the correct ideals to hold things together. The NCR, on the other hand, as you mentioned, maybe. Can you bring the old world government out of all this rubble? Is it possible to rebuild and get back to what it was? Or are they really just going to have to start all over? Because they have had some success in California and now in Nevada, but is that going to continue? Are they a strong enough force? Are they strong enough politically and morally to continue?
Well, I think it seems like the NCR are trying to expand too much in terms of what is good for them, what they can uphold. I think if they try to expand too much, their supply lines and hell, just population will eventually just spread too thin. Instead of just kind of focusing on a bit of small area and just kind of really intensely focus on it to make sure that this can uphold itself 100% before they expand.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see where you're coming from with that, because they do speak a lot about how there is still some corruption and there are still some water shortages and food shortages in California. And that does still happen occasionally, but on the whole, most people are happy living under NCR rule. And I can definitely see where that's coming from. Another possibility is that the NCR stays where it is and has only taken Hoover Dam in order to secure more energy for California. But there's this really interesting thing where we could say that it would be possible for the NCR to, instead of expand, let's say they stay where they are, they secure their power base there, and they become what is effectively a new nation out of the wasteland. Would it be possible for them to ally themselves with someone of greater power? And who would that? I wouldn't say greater power, but another nation that could possibly come out of the wastes. And who would that be? As a suggestion, perhaps the Great Khans.
I've never understood the Great Khan's intentions. I purely kind of have them down as being quite savage, sort of in a similar vein to like the Legion, Caesar's Legion, but that's probably based purely on the way they present themselves and whatnot. But I mean, are the Great Khans actually? I mean, are they good?
They in fact are. They take care of each other as though it was a nation. They say that before losing Bitter Springs to the NCR, where the NCR just killed tons of the Khans, they were a very powerful force there, and that was effectively their home before they moved to Red Rock Canyon in New Vegas. And they explain that they don't want to fight anyone. They don't want to create drugs and sell them to the wasteland, but that is the only way that they need to get by. Granted that they are based on a lot of the ideals of the ancient Khans, of Genghis Khan's army, including even their housing style is very reminiscent of a lot of rural Mongolia.
Yeah, you can definitely see that, along with their armor too, yeah.
Yeah, and they do admit that they do come from a warrior culture, but we have seen other warrior cultures throughout history that have come through to create better things. I mean, you could argue that America was very similar to that. Rome was warrior culture as well. Greece, specifically Sparta in Greece, was, these are all warrior cultures. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that one of the possible endings for the Great Khans in New Vegas is that they move north to Wyoming and become a great nation over time.
I always thought the Great Khans were an interesting contrast to the Fiends in terms of their organization ability, because the Fiends were like the new Raiders of New Vegas. And their structures are really cool to look at, because the Great Khans have a very more honorific social structure, very similar to who am I thinking of? Oh, there's another group I was thinking of, but essentially it's a very good social structure. But you look at the Fiends, that there is a rank system. They have that big guy in the vault. I'm trying to remember what his name was. It was not Motorhead, but something like that. But I always thought that was a cool little contrast, because here you have a drug organization that deals drugs, but they are more honor bound, and the Fiends are kill everybody, sell the most drugs, and rape, pillage, destroy. I thought that was a cool literary contrast between the two big groups. So I would love to not only see or to read more about what the Khans will do and should do, but also maybe see how organizations like the Fiends can also enhance their influence around the wastelands, to see what maybe, what new wars, what new small factions might just simply branch off. That would be a cool storyline to look at.
Yeah, I mean, that could be interesting, but I do feel the Fiends are literally that. They're drug fiends. You can't trust them. They can't team up with anyone.
Yeah, I don't think they could become structured enough to actually become any sort of society other than just the camps they have, where they team up for raids on caravans and shoot up their drugs and all that kind of things. I don't think they can in any way become structured enough to make any sort of impact on the wasteland other than mayhem and chaos.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that. And, there are some groups that definitely have the social structure needed to create a nation. And we can, we see throughout history, even in the real world, where there are groups that don't seem likely to create their own nation and go on to do so. Again, I don't want to be too American-centric, but definitely the Americas have that same kind of thing. Even another one that I can think of is Algeria. Which, for a long time was so much a part of France that even French people just thought of it as another part of France. And, it was just such a big shock when Algeria announced that it wanted to be independent. Because it was thought to be a part of this country. It was never thought to be separate. It wasn't as if Algeria was thought of as a colony. It was literally just a part of France. And so, maybe we could see something along those lines. Maybe we'll see a part of the NCR separating off, or maybe we'll see another one of these groups where it doesn't seem likely that they will become a strong power, but that they eventually do. I mean, who knows? I mean, we could even see the Boomers, or we could see Rivet City expand into a greater group.
What's really cool about the Fallout universe in terms of breaking off factions is that a lot of these groups come together under some sort of umbrella. They think alike, and they do, what they do to establish themselves. But down the road, they start breaking off. You see wandering fiends around the wasteland. You'll see raider groups that have taken up under various.
You have completely cut out, my friend. I can kind of continue on with your thought process there, and
I'm sorry. Is that better? All right.
Yeah. There you go.
So it's really cool just to think about what the potential for these groups to make new factions. Just because there's no solid structure to say you can't do it, they'll just simply wander off into some other part of the wasteland and they'll settle themselves up. I think Fallout 1 was where you had that big fiend ghoul city.
Necropolis is what you're thinking
Necropolis,
of. Yes.
thank you. So stuff like that, definitely very possible, and also makes the storyline even more richer.
Mm. Yeah, it absolutely does, and I absolutely agree with you. It's going to be really interesting to see. Again, not spreading rumors or anything. It'll be very interesting to see in Fallout 4 more of this development of the time period. And something that I really want to talk about is the Fallout time period, and the fact that there are some events that we already being canon. For example, the thing that is quite often talked about within the Fallout universe is that the farthest thing out that has been stated is that the jukebox from Old World Blues fended off an entire invasion by himself in the year something like 3000. So we do know that things from here on out will continue. And it's just really interesting to think about how this time period has gone on, from the beginning of the Great War until now. And, when do you guys say, in your experience, what would you say, even less of what would you say, when do you hope that we'll start to see cities like London or New York or things like that coming back to life?
World or in the real sense?
Within the Fallout universe.
Well, I don't know. I kind of would like to see it, and kind of not, because I really like the completely desolate feeling and ruined wasteland. So seeing a city like New York coming back to life, that would kind of ruin that. But it would also be very interesting to see. But as for when, that would that will probably take a very long time, since I don't even think the NCR has a city like that. I mean, they have back in California, they do have a big city.
Shady Sands would, from my experience, I would say is probably the biggest city.
Yeah, but that's not even like close to being anything like New York, and the NCR is a huge organization with lots of resources and peace and time to develop a city. So I don't know, it'd probably take a couple of 100 years more for that kind of city to spring up.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of the Fallout universe, we're not going to see too much relevance on cities across the pond. Just because most of the Fallout universe is centered on China, Russia, and the United States. So, for the most part, I think the future direction of them will be rebuilding London, or not London, rebuilding the United States, rebuilding parts of maybe China, maybe some areas of Russia off Alaska. Those areas I could see easily be coming back to life in the Fallout universe. But going into Europe or other areas, I don't know how successful of a story, or how successful that storyline would develop in this universe.
I think that I may have phrased what I said wrong. What I meant was a city the size of London or New York, not necessarily those cities specifically being rebuilt. More of, how long are we going to be able to keep, if we keep within the universe, how long are we going to be able to go out and still say this is an apocalyptic game? When does it become just futuristic instead of apocalyptic, and it's really, it's a very hard, it really is. We're going to move on to our next topic here in just a second, but we're going to take a little hard stop right here. And now that we're back from our break, we're actually going to start talking about a new topic. We are very specifically going to talk about what exactly is it that makes Mr. House so powerful. Now, in previous podcasts, we have absolutely talked about how he has an army of security drones. We have talked about how he is a captain in industry and a genius, and effectively the ruling head of the Strip and New Vegas in general. I mean, we see his influence all the way out to Victor in Good Springs, and Victor goes, sort of where you go along your journey. And what do you guys think of Mr. House? Just starting off, what is your take on him?
Well, I didn't really like him as an antagonist. I don't know. I didn't like the idea that the main sort of enemy wasn't a piece of AI. It kind of it took something away from me.
Two things that I want
he wasn't really an AI. I think if I'm correct, that was Mr. House. Just if I'm right, he was hooked up to the fan. Yeah. So that was Mr. House.
Have I already been introduced?
Oh yes, this is our new guest, Monty, who is joining us. You can check him out on YouTube, Fallout News.
Fallout.
Yeah, Fallout News.
That's the 4.
And his videos are very good, so check him out if you get the chance. I do want to reiterate now that yeah, we'll have a little link dump when we put this up on the SoundCloud and when we put it up on YouTube. That'll link you to his information and to ours as well. But anyways, something interesting that you said, Lucas, that I want to point out is that you called him an antagonist. Now, why specifically would you say that? Why would you say that he is a bad guy?
Well, I mean, what else is he? he clearly isn't. He clearly isn't a good guy.
Well, I think because he manipulates all these people. Like he just plays mind games with everyone. From his little pod there. So,
But is it for the best?
I kind of feel like he's the
Probably not.
I feel like he's kind of the moral gray area of Fallout New Vegas. He's kind of the neutral ending.
Because
I
with
don't
him,
really-
you have stability with him, but you don't really know what his true motives are. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I feel like the undertone is there from the beginning. You can tell he's a sinister guy,
Yeah.
regardless of what.
I think the game, New Vegas itself, kind of pushes you away from supporting him. Like, because all the playthroughs I've done, I've never supported him. They introduced the Legion and the NCR, and it kind of never really wants you to go down House's path, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say there's more influence pulling you towards the NCR or the Legion than there is towards Mr. House.
Besides just Victor following you around everywhere.
I do want to point out something about Victor is that he does say that Mr. House normally does control all the Securitrons directly, but that Victor had to start running off of AI because Goodsprings was just outside of his reach without the Platinum chip.
Just. I'm not even sure that was true.
It may not have been.
I think Mr. House made him say that, so it didn't seem that way. I'm not sure.
Again, we just talked about Mr. House playing mind games. That is absolutely possible. But we do see that New Vegas did kind of take this route where we kind of had a good guy and a bad guy, and then sort of two in-betweens, with the in-betweens being Independent Vegas and Mr. House. How do you guys feel about having sort of a good and bad guy with the gray in-betweens instead of the just good and evil of Fallout 3?
Well, there were two gray areas in there, too, because there was also not only Mr. House, there was also the Anarchy route, which you could do with, was it Mr. Happy? Not Mr. Happy. Who's the...
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, man. So he was, another potential route you could go with deciding the ultimate fate of the universe, and that was also kind of a moral gray area that you could take as well, in addition to Mr. House's route.
Well, that ending, though, with the Yes Man path, that was just such a horrible ending, in my opinion. Just you kind of did all that, and he just screws you over in the end.
I was really let down by the Independence ending, mostly because you can't play afterwards, so you don't really get to reap the benefits of being the ruler of New Vegas. So it's kind of like, well, if I have the ability to give myself all the power, I'm going to do that and see what the repercussions are. And it just kind of stops you.
I think that you're incorrect in saying that you are the ruler of New Vegas.
Yeah, technically, Yes Man is.
Even beyond that, it's more of that it's more of that Vegas stays as an independent state with the king sort of having some influence and you having some influence, the boomers having some influence on the outside. A lot of these groups just sort of keeping to themselves. I do like the idea of saying that it's sort of anarchy, but the law is kept more by local groups instead of by an overarching government.
That's what I got out of the whole deal, is at the end of the game, you weren't really supposed to see what, you weren't really supposed to take over New Vegas with the Anarchy route. You were supposed to take down the structure, and then you move on. That's where the story moves on. That's kind of how I interpreted the end of that route.
Well, I wouldn't really say that. The way I see it is just kind of become the ruler of the New Vegas, not really the outside area, the Mojave Wasteland, just kind of the casinos and free side, perhaps, kind of like Mr. House was.
Mm-hmm.
Like you kind of take his place. That's how I saw it. Anyways.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting take. But back to my original question is, do you guys prefer to have this sort of good, bad, and then in between, or do you prefer
definitely.
having good and evil, or would you even like it where everything was gray?
Personally, I'd like it where everything is gray, Because then you're not like, oh, you get all this bad karma for joining this faction or whatnot.
Yeah, I'm with Monte. I'm a big fan of the Witcher series as well, and everything there is pretty much a gray area, depending on how you see it. It could be good and it could be bad. I think that's really fun, kind of deciding for yourself what's good and what's right, and then what's evil and wrong.
Because I do find, regardless of how you play it, as long as there's good and bad karma, it definitely pushes you down a certain role, or you take on a certain role. Like, it really influences the way you play, and sometimes you don't really get to explore, in ways that you should.
I would like to really see the Fallout universe take more of a relativistic view of morality in terms of what should be good and bad karma, because that would be something that you would think would logically follow after the fall of civilization, is that the old morals of what's good and bad suddenly are no longer applicable.
Right. Because commenting on what Lucas said about the game's kind of pushing you down one road, I definitely feel it does that in Fallout 3 with kind of pushing you down the good ending with the FEV virus that President Eden tells you to put into Project Purity, because it's kind of like you've been fighting the Enclave and their agenda the entire time.
Yeah, that didn't really make any sense.
Yeah, no. So why would you suddenly just say, oh well, I'll take it from you, but I'll carry out your plan.
Yeah, it feels like they just kind of force that in there so they could be like, oh, we have some gray area in the game. It's not just, do the right thing. But it just doesn't make sense at all, so it didn't really work.
Yes, so it still pushes you down, just either not using the FEV virus or giving it to Elder Alliance.
I would definitely say that the karma system definitely needs some sort of overhaul. Because
I actually think they should just get rid of it. I mean, I just don't even see how they could make it worthy of even being there. I've never really liked it.
This is my explanation for how it could stay. So you have, instead of, I really like the reputation system. First off, I want to say that. I thought that was probably the best way to approach things. You have reputation with each group individually instead of an overarching karma. Yeah, I do want them to keep the karma system because I want it to have an influence on how I speak to regular Wastelanders, not the higher-ups or anything like that, because they're going to care about reputation. But when it comes down to shopkeepers and things like that, if they have heard that I killed a few random Wastelanders out on the road, or I took out a caravan, that should affect my karma, because that would obviously be evil. Things that are inherently evil versus things that aren't. If I steal from, say I steal from the Legion, I don't think that should affect my karma. If I steal from the NCR, I don't think that should affect my karma. That should affect my reputation. My karma should be affected more by those very, very black and white sort of things. If you kill an innocent person who's not attacking you, you therefore get negative karma. If you have helped someone who is in need, you therefore get positive karma. And everything else should be left to reputation.
Yeah, you should also kind of, when you say that if they hear that you killed some random Wastelander or attacked a caravan, it should also kind of have you should have the ability to kind of hide that by either being in hiding and not coming out, or just kind of being able to kill all the witnesses, so it doesn't really leave the area. So no one really knows that it's you who did it. So if I attack a caravan, but I kill everyone in sight, there's no one really to report who did it.
Yeah, well, what I think is that if you have very evil karma in the game, well, that's just from just stealing stuff when nobody's looking. How does that affect your interactions with people, because they don't know you stole that stuff? So why should that affect anything, really?
I forget what they call it, but it's basically the witness system should definitely be in place for that. If I kill a bunch of Wastelanders on the road out and nobody sees it,
a game that did that perfectly was Red Dead Redemption. I mean, you could just go in and like rob a bank, and it would show up on the radar like an eye, like that person saw you do that. And if you go kill each one of those guys, then no one knows you did that. So they should have something like that.
It would definitely be interesting. But, in Fallout 3, there were some good points to the karma system. I thought it was very interesting that based on your reputation, you were able to get certain companions. For example, Butch would only join you if you were neutral karma. Jericho would only join you if you were of negative karma, etc. And I thought that was a very interesting idea. Something that I do want to talk about with companions is, do you guys like the current setup of having one humanoid and one non-humanoid companion? For example, for those of you that are having trouble thinking about it, how in Fallout 3 you can have Dogmeat plus Butch, or in Fallout New Vegas how you could have Ed E plus Arcade.
Yeah, I think that part's fine. I just think they need to make the companions like more in depth, like have more like depth to them. Like Fallout 3, I think companions were just awful. Like there was no depth to them, no like background really. But in New Vegas, they added onto that with the companion wheel, and then each companion had a quest. So I think they need to keep doing more of that and give more depth to the companions. But I think just what you said, that's fine.
That was something that was difficult to actually access, was each individual companion's quest. 'Cause I actually did not know that each companion had a quest until almost a year into the game. And that's something that that's partly my fault, but I think if there were new companions, make it a little more obvious.
I still have never been able to do Arcade Ganon's quest, which kind of pisses me off. But
here's something that I want to say, is that I appreciate that these companions, that it's hard to get to them, because and this is something that we've talked about on a previous podcast. Lucas, if you remember, we were talking about how interesting the sort of trust system is. In real life, it makes it very realistic in that you're not going to be able to have someone. It is kind of realistic that in the Wasteland someone would join up with you as sort of a mercenary type guy, but it's not realistic for them to trust you immediately. You build up trust over time, and I agree that maybe they should make that a little bit more obvious. But it is very, very nice to see that based on how I'm playing, I might unlock something that I didn't know about.
Yeah, I like that too. I did like that too. But going back to the basis of your original question, I thought it was kind of cool having like a say for example a human partner and a non-human partner, like Dogmeat and whoever else, or even Dogmeat and Forks, because it's like, I think having Dogmeat as your literally like as a dog should, he's kind of your search and finder companion, then like Forks as your muscle to help you battle things out. I think that's a good dynamic, and it kind of, if you want to play it down that road, they nailed that to a T. But there was definitely
does Fox counts as a non-human companion, right?
No, he counts as a human companion.
Oh, he counts as a human companion? Oh.
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say that would make things a little unbalanced.
No. What it is that it is humanoid, so Fox would count as a humanoid, so would Sharon from Underworld would also count. And then non-humanoid is the other ones.
Oh. Yeah, kind of rusty on that. I just played with Fox most of the time since he's basically indestructible. So
Basically indestructible. I can't tell you how long I tried with just the alien blaster to take him down with just headshots.
Oh my god. I would just launch Fat Man's, mini nukes into him, and it just wouldn't do anything, except it would kill myself sometimes, but...
Yes, thousands and thousands of health. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. That's something that Fallout New Vegas did very interestingly, in that on hardcore, your companions effectively became as NPCs and died very, very easily.
Yeah.
And they actually died, unlike in Fallout 3, where if you were somehow to get Fox down to 0 health, he would just become unconscious.
That made it kind of annoying to have companions in New Vegas, because I found myself constantly like reloading saves because my companions would die, So
yeah,
I actually just entirely forewent the entire companion cycle. I actually felt it was just annoying Yui in battle. All of a sudden, your companion's dead, and then 3 Cazadors come up right behind you because he was dealing with all 3 of them. Yeah, I chose not to really take many.
It's like he just passes on his troubles to you, and it's like, thanks. But, you know...
I'm gonna take a nap. Please take care of this, will you?
Yeah, right, I'll be right back. But
Yeah, whenever I get into a big combat situation, I'm like, boom, go home.
But I think if they did serve one true good purpose, it's definitely as like your bag carrier, because the amount of times you find all this loot and armor that you just can't carry, Forks is brilliant for that, you know.
And you know, on top of that, I loved that in New Vegas Lesson 3 that they would comment on a lot of the things that you were doing. You know, hearing Veronica talk, if you bring her to the Boomers, about how they remind her of the Brotherhood of Steel, or talking about how weird, you know, Cass would say things about certain caravans and things like that. I found that very, very interesting, and it definitely helped with the immersion of the story, that these were not just, you know, blank-faced companions. These were definitely people with
their own views and stuff. Yep.
Yeah.
Though I really actually did like one particular line from Fox. Whenever you're in a settlement, he just says, "I can't believe that people trust you so much. They don't attack me on sight."
Yeah, that made me laugh a few times.
Yeah, especially because he's kind of, even though he's pretty grotesque, super good, he is kind of a lovable bear in a way.
Yeah, he was definitely one of my favorite characters in Fallout 3.
You know, somebody recently on the r/Fallout made a post about why they believed that Jericho was the most lovable companion.
Jericho, jeez.
And they definitely had a very interesting take on it. That they were talking about how when they first played through, they felt that he was their surrogate father. He was that father figure that they were missing since they were looking for their father. And how Jericho was, you know, you did have to sort of be evil as, you know, to get him to be your follower at first. But over time, he would normally just not, you know, he would kind of say, you know, I thought you were badass whenever you make kind of a good decision. But at the same time, he sticks with you. He believes in you. He wants to be a better person himself. Even though, you know, that really doesn't come across, you kind of can see where I'll use this term, headcanon, can definitely come in with some of those characters.
Yeah, I might have to do an evil playthrough now to experience that with Jericho, because I've never had him.
I think I had him for a little bit up until I got Sharon, or Sharon, however you pronounce it.
Yeah, I like Sharon actually.
And ever since The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, I just haven't really bothered with companions. Not even for backpack carrying. I've used them very, very rarely.
Yeah.
I can definitely see when you're doing a fun playthrough, it's definitely I would agree with you that it's more fun to play without them, because they kind of just get in the way of your general exploring and things like that. But when you're playing through more for the story, when you're trying to get immersed, it's definitely nice to have someone there to comment on things and things like that.
Yeah, I like dog meat. Bark, bark.
He definitely had the best commentary in the entire game.
Oh, of course.
Most insightful, like
dialogue.
Oh man, you know, I really just appreciate how much story they put into the background of each and every single character. Each one is handmade. They're each so believable and understanding. You know, you can definitely understand where they come from. Even some of these, some of the dead characters that we don't even see a lot of, we see that they're in Fallout 3. One of the things that I'm always reminded of is I believe it was called the nuclear waste dump in Fallout 3. I can't remember quite where it is. It's in the northeast somewhere of the map. But if you go into a
disposal facility, I think it was, or
yes. Yeah, and if you went into a very specific there was only one building in the entire area, and inside you found a man called I believe he was called the Loner or something like that. And he was dead and surrounded by all these radiation materials, trying to keep himself healthy, even though he's living in this irradiated area. And even him, you could see that the story behind him was so much more. He was just sort of a guy who didn't really belong anywhere. He tried to make himself a home, and he wasn't stupid about it. He realized that where he was, there was radiation, so he tried to keep himself healthy, but still succumbed to over time.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love most about Fallout. There's all these little stories going on. Like if you go into, I think it's one of the satellite array places or whatever in Fallout 3, and there's like these notes, these series of notes that tell this story about this little boy who couldn't make it inside the vault or something, and he like died there. And it's just like it's just so in depth, even like just little things like that. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and the father looking for help for his injured son, and they're hiding out in a drainage. There's all these little stories that really give the game this extra feeling of depth and often also despair.
I think one of my favorite little things about the game is the stories that aren't even given as notes, but things you find around the environment. If you look in some areas, like near Old Olney, there's a shadow of a person, an ash from when the bomb blew up. And then if you look in some of the underground tunnels, I remember once seeing a couple pictures of this, and I saw this myself. There's a ramp and a crashed motorcycle.
I think that is the underground tunnel to the White House. Well, there's a skeleton stuck in the lamps. That's really neat.
Is that the monorail from damn, what's the DLC? Broken Steel DLC.
No,
I think it was part of the regular game.
Yeah, it's just on the way into the to the White House area.
Yeah. That in the Capitol.
Recently, I was doing a playthrough of the Fallout 3. I was in the Springvale school. It's on my YouTube channel. And I was Fallout can be really dark sometimes, but I was shocked that there was in the school, it's little skeletons of kids. I'm like, I can't believe they even did that. Because you can't kill kids in the game, but yet they have dead kid skeletons there. I'm like, wow, I didn't notice that.
Inside the cages and stuff.
Yeah. I'm like, yep, those are definitely kids' bodies.
Anyways, what I was saying was there are a couple of things that they really don't mention within the Fallout universe that they really could if they wanted to take the game further into more realistic and even darker things. The two big things that I can definitely imagine happening in the Wasteland that they really don't talk about are pedophilia and rape. And those are two big things that happen in the real world that they don't touch on at all in the Fallout universe.
But also, I think it's the Republic of Dave. The undertones are there, even though it's not in the narrative. But if you look around that entire little colonies, the majority of the people there are kids. When you really think about it, it's kind of suggestive of something without even saying too much.
Yeah, that is a little creepy. And the fact that all the children call him Daddy Dave, President Daddy Dave.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Very creepy.
Yeah. But you could also kind of, just for Bethesda, lead to a shitstorm of media coverage. Really, really bad press. So I think that's definitely intentional that they left that out.
Oh, yeah.
Grand Theft Auto 5 now has first-person blowjobs. Is Bethesda really going to worry about that sort of thing?
There's also
that's
where you can rip apart somebody's chest and take out their innards.
Yeah. Well, with Grand Theft Auto, that's kind of Rockstar's thing to piss people off. That's not really what Bethesda wants to do, I don't think. But they still touch on some pretty sensitive subjects, in Fallout 3, Arifu, the whole cannibalism thing. What they gotta do to survive, they gotta lure people in there and eat them and whatnot, and drink blood or whatever.
Also, Andale. I think it's Andale.
Andale is the one that is more of the cannibalism.
Oh yeah, Arifu's vampires. I forgot.
Yeah, vampires.
Yeah.
still pretty weird. Albeit not really realistic.
I actually think that is kind of realistic. You can think about all the crazy cults that are on now. If you think about when you're in the Wasteland, if it gives you a family, how far are you going to go into crazy? How many of those people are there just because it gives them protection? They don't honestly believe that they're vampires, but they're safe there.
Yeah. Well, we don't really know what realistic is in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, so anything can go.
This is very true.
Yeah, I mean, it can bring out like the darker side in anyone, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, is that we really don't see a lot of cannibalism either. I would honestly love to see somebody. I don't know, for you PC players that are joining us, I would love to see a mod that makes things a little bit more realistic, to see some of those things that are definitely happening in the wasteland, but nobody just really talks about them. But on the other hand, they do a very, very good job of talking about quite a few other things that are very, very dark. We talk about this sort of racism that they have against the ghouls. We talk about how people are cleaning up dead bodies. That's just something that just happens every day. We talk about people being kidnapped by the super mutants in Fallout 3, and how that's something that happens, and it's terrible, but no one can really do anything about it. And they do such a good job of touching on those issues. It's just that, in my opinion, I would love to see it go even further. I would love to see how they do this in their very storytelling, very Fallout way.
I think the slavery. Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was saying, I think the slavery aspect was probably the most well done in terms of concealing how dark it really is. Because if you think, today we know slavery has a very dark, dangerous, bad history, but you look in the Fallout universe, slavery suddenly takes a different perspective. It's not necessarily dark depending on what perspective you came from, but seen as a kind of a neutral commodity item. You have slaves that are hapless wastelanders, and it depends on how you view your journey. If you're a good karmic character, slavery is bad, but if you're a neutral, then really it's, is it actually bad? And if you're bad, then obviously slavery is a good thing.
I don't know. I mean, pretty sure everyone here, when you went to Paradise Falls, your immediate thought was like, I'm going to kill all these guys and I'm going to free these slaves. I mean, I'm guessing that's what everybody did on their first playthrough.
Oh, yeah, if you were, like I said, but I'm saying if you were looking at it from your player's perspective, not from your realistic, because we know slavery's bad. But if you were you were the actual player, like you were the player.
Was the player really know? Because how has that been taught? Like inside the vault there? Like,
exactly the point. Yeah. Which is it? What would your character say?
I want to cut this conversation off just a little bit and kind of bring it back, because what we're about to get into is this whole idea of are we born with this idea of what is right and wrong, and I don't think that's exactly something we want to talk about here.
Actually, could I just add one really quick?
Yeah, of course.
Well, with the slavery that was going on, especially in America, that was kind of
that's kind of our thing.
They used black people, and the reason they used black people was because they saw them as something less than humans, so it was okay. But whereas in Fallout, that kind of racism isn't really a thing. So you can't really view the slaves as less than human.
Yeah. Well, I think this is gonna be a little speculation on my part, but if the next Fallout is indeed set in Boston, we know about the Commonwealth and the Institute and how they use androids as slaves, and they don't seem to care too much because they view them less as human, like you said. So I think the next Fallout could definitely touch on that slavery topic more.
Yeah, there's already the railroad organization.
Yeah.
So they could do like a Civil War type thing, freeing the slaves and whatnot.
And that's why I think the slavery aspect was probably one of the most well done moral conflicts that Fallout introduces to all of us. That's why I really like that aspect of this game.
Definitely.
Yeah. I can definitely agree. There was a time that I remember I was playing as a neutral character, and like true neutral. I definitely helped the Brotherhood of Steel, but I was absolutely tempted to put the FEV modified FEV virus into Project Purity. But when I got to Paradise Falls, in this neutral character's mind, it was my thought that well, children absolutely should not be slaves. So I specifically paid for the children and left everyone else.
That's what I did.
Yeah, I did the same. But then I did come back with a combat shotgun.
Yeah. Well, with a neutral character, you can also just have that that kind of well, you got to do what you got to do to survive attitude.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what, though, I enslaved that freaking Arkansas dude in Minefield real quick.
Oh man, I wish I did.
Wow.
I did that real quick. Like I'm just like, dude.
I always kill him too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he looked so sad afterwards. He's like, oh.
And the pit expanded on that even further, and brought slavery again to that sort of gray area of, is it necessary to have all these slaves? I mean, because even Asher says that, he doesn't want the slaves. He hates the idea of having slaves. Being in the Brotherhood of Steel, he does have, being a former member of the Brotherhood of Steel, he did have a very strong sense of a code of honor. And for him to have slaves, it was wrong, but he said that he needed to in order for, the cure to eventually come to reality.
And if you're talking about a gray area in Fallout, the pit definitely had a lot of that with the, should we use the baby for the cure, or should we save the baby or whatever?
Mm-hmm. And I definitely think that, me personally, I absolutely always allowed Asher to keep the baby. Because even though, it is terrible that these slaves were being kept there, I knew that Asher was doing the right thing. I felt that through speaking to him, I felt that he definitely had a sense of what was right and wrong, and that he was just he had to follow that moral gray line in order to get to where everyone would be, free and happy again.
It's one of those Machiavellian views. The ends justify the means.
Yes.
Yeah. And something that I really want to talk about is how far the Brotherhood of Steel really has come. We see a lot of these sort of branches of the Brotherhood of Steel. We see the Brotherhood outcasts on the East Coast. We see Lion's Brotherhood of Steel in the Pentagon. We see Asher, who is a former member of the Brotherhood of Steel. And then we see the Midwest, where the Brotherhood of Steel was a very, very large influence in Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. And then in Fallout New Vegas, where we're still very, very close to California, where the Brotherhood of Steel was, originally from, we see them having one little bunker, and they don't do anything. They sort of just stay there.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because in the original Fallouts, the Brotherhood was just, they were just after technology. But then in 3, which some fans of the older games really hated, they took on the role like the good guys and saving the wasteland, which brings up the question, like, who's really the Brotherhood? Is it the outcasts in Fallout 3, or is it the Lions Brotherhood?
I think that Veronica really embodies this sort of idea. It's where does the Brotherhood go from here? It is obvious that the Brotherhood cannot continue as this sort of technology-stealing demon group. They have to become something more. And Veronica has this great idea of helping the Wastelanders and things like that. Elder Lyons, who runs the Brotherhood out of the Pentagon, definitely has a good idea of protecting the Wasteland, making everything better, not being rulers of anyone, but definitely helping everyone, being sort of an army or a police force.
Which, I mean, I understand people like wanting Bethesda to like respect the lore, but I mean, how can you really not like the Brotherhood? I mean, they're doing like good things for the wasteland. They're trying to clean all the water and stuff, save all the people, instead of just being like, oh, give me all your technology. I mean, I don't really understand that.
Yeah. Plus, it's not really viable for the Brotherhood to go about their business as they have, because when they're out collecting.
I mean, it's been 200 years.
Yeah. But when they are collecting technology, accidents are bound to happen, and suddenly, some people will go missing, some will die, some might get exiled. So they just kind of keep reducing and reducing in numbers to the point where they can't really sustain themselves anymore unless they kind of open up, take in some recruits, and then in turn also help their surroundings.
I want to combine what both of you just said and say that first off, I don't think that Fallout 3 was really a break from the lore because we're talking about this part of the Brotherhood because again, the Brotherhood started out in California being a very very West Coast thing. They've traveled 3,000 miles. I don't think people understand that there is a gap of 3,000 or more miles between Washington D.C. and California, and they've
How exactly
walked.
did they do that?
It's said that they walked along. They walked along with trucks that carried supplies. They had enough vehicles to carry supplies, but not to carry soldiers. So they did.
Well, that's strange. You don't see any trucks in Fallout 3. At least usable ones, workable ones.
This is true, but it's also could be that once they got there, they converted into walls that we see at the Pentagon and things like that. And in Fallout 2, you do have a car. Which is a good mention. But you're talking about, and it's not really that much of a break from the lore to say that these guys who have just traveled, 3,000 miles and seen all of what the wasteland really is, having a very, very different view than a group who has been in the same spot for 200 years. They're not going to change their ideals because they're not moving forward. They're not changing.
They had to adapt. Because New Vegas gives you a good look at, like, okay, well, if you don't want the Brotherhood to help people, then look, they just sit by themselves in a low bunker just hoarding technology. I mean, they had to adapt, you know?
Mm-hmm.
This kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, a little bit earlier about, all these factions, they have these structure until at the end of the day, people start saying, I want to move off, and now we have all these different destinies for different types, different small sections of each faction. So, like the Outcast, for example, is a good example of just, they want to defer from Elder Lyons' call to protect the populace. Now we're going to go out. We want the technology. We want to look for technology, keep our goals. And the other guy, and of course, Lyons is like, we want to protect the populace. We want to be able to not only follow our goals, but also protect everybody and bring everybody up to safety. So I think that's a perfect relevant point to get back with.
Before we go any further, I want to say that I think that is the perfect way to wrap up this podcast. Again, I want to give a big shout out to Simon, Will, and Monty, who have been joining us today on the Hollow Disc Weekly podcast. And you guys are just great, and I've had so much fun talking to you guys. Hopefully, we can have you back again. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who's been here. We'll have a little link dump so you can check out Monty stuff on the Fallout news, and we will probably have Will and Simon on soon. And remember to ask any questions at Holotapes Weekly on Twitter anytime, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about what you guys send us on our next podcast. So thank you so much, guys, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Peace out.
Stay classy.
I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start